This is CNN Breaking News.
Welcome back to Starting Point, everyone. We are following breaking news this morning. The U.S. ambassador to Libya killed in an attack in Benghazi. The president just released a statement a few minutes ago, quote, "I strongly condemn the outrageous attack on our diplomatic facility in Benghazi, which took the lives of 4 Americans, including Ambassador Chris Stephens. I've directed my administration to provide all necessary resources to support the security of our personnel in Libya and to increase security at our diplomatic posts around the globe. While the United States rejects efforts to denigrate the religious beliefs of others, we must all unequivocally oppose the kind of senseless violence that took the lives of these public servants."
And just to be clear, as you're waking up here, 2 separate incidents. It's still murky, the timeline, but basically you have these protests in Cairo, Egypt, and also in Benghazi, Libya, presumably over this film that is purported to be blasphemous of the Prophet Muhammad. So they breached the walls of both the embassy in Cairo, protests there, breached the walls of the consulate in Benghazi. As a result of that, 1 State Department worker was killed. After all of that, then we have learned that this ambassador to Libya, Ambassador Stephens, was apparently targeted along with 3 workers as he was exiting that consulate in Benghazi. And that is when we learned he had been killed in addition to 3 other workers. So just to be clear, 2 separate incidents, but potentially all related. We just don't know.
That's what we're finding out today. I want to bring in Congressman Randy Forbes from Virginia, a Republican. And Congressman Forbes, the death of U.S. Ambassador Chris Stephens, it is a tragedy for his family. It is a tragedy in the diplomatic community, but it is a major moment in U.S. foreign policy right now. What do you think this signifies this morning?
Well, John, there's no question that this is a tragic situation. Our hearts go out to the families involved here. But, on 9/11, when that tragedy hit the United States, I was the newest elected member of Congress, and I remember we got through that for 2 reasons. The first thing is that we tried to calm the nation down, which I think is always important for us to do. So we're making decisions that are reasonable and rational and not emotional. But the second thing is then to analyze our policies and see which ones do we need to continue and which ones do we need to change. I think we need to do the same thing in this situation. We need to take a time to pause, get all the facts, and then we have to examine our policies and look at them and see if there's anything different we need to be doing.
What do we need to change then? Finish that statement for me then, sir.
Well, John, I can't answer that until we've looked at all the facts. I think sometimes that we like to have knee-jerk reactions, but one of the things it seems like is that our foreign policy efforts in the Middle East are having some bumpy roads right now, if not collapsing altogether. And I think at some particular point, after we have taken some time to analyze this situation, we need to examine that and look at that and see which road we want to travel and move forward then.
On the subject, sir, of knee-jerk reaction, I suppose actually it's not my place to call it a knee-jerk reaction. The Romney campaign yesterday released a statement before the assassination of Ambassador Stephens, but it was talking about the violence that had been going on in Libya and in Cairo. The Romney campaign released this statement, said, "I am outraged by the attacks on American diplomatic missions in Libya and Egypt and by the death of an American consulate worker in Benghazi." That is a separate death, by the way, than Chris Stephens. Romney goes on to say, "It's disgraceful that the Obama administration's first response was not to condemn attacks on our diplomatic missions, but to sympathize with those who waged the attacks." What's interesting about this statement, Congressman Forbes, is this statement came out before there was any violence. Mitt Romney is calling out the Obama team for not condemning the violence before the violence ever happened. You're a supporter of Mitt Romney. Do you support that statement?
Well, John, I think one of the things that you're not suggesting is that Mitt Romney could somehow see into the future and predict this. I think what Mitt Romney was doing is to recognizing that, this is an administration whose foreign policy certainly is collapsing in many parts around the world, whether it's in Europe, where we pulled out our missile defense systems only to get the Russians to spend more money on military instead of less. When you look at what's happening in Egypt and Libya at this particular point in time, I think what amazes me, though, is the situation at some particular point in time, there's got to be some accountability on this administration to simply attack the Romney campaign for a single statement, but not examine the foreign policy flaws that this administration has had. Doesn't seem correct for me to do. I just think, though, at some particular point in time, after today, after tomorrow, after we've assessed these facts, we need to examine our foreign policy and ask if we're making the right decisions in the Middle East. And I think in many situations we're not.
All right, Congressman Randy Forbes, thank you so much for joining us this morning. A very sad morning for the entire community here.
I want to bring Jamie Rubin back in, former Assistant Secretary of State. And Jamie Rubin, this is something that we talked so much about last year in covering the revolutions, the question over who would then fill the vacuum. And interestingly, when you talk about these dictators of both, Libya, be it Muammar Gaddafi, or in Egypt, Hosni Mubarak, they did keep in check these radical Islamic groups. And now that they are gone, here they are.
Well, that's exactly right. And that is what they used to tell us. That was the argument that was given and is still given to some degree by some of the monarchies in the Persian Gulf, the Saudis, the Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates. They say, look, if you didn't have us, you would have either chaos, you would have Islamic extremism. The Muslim Brotherhood was the big enemy of Hosni Mubarak in Egypt, who he saw their rise as yielding chaos and violence. Now, of course, what we're seeing is some of the things they worried about are true, but some are not true. The Muslim Brotherhood president has come in Egypt, Morsi, and he has been relatively calm, relatively measured. He condemned the Iranian president recently.
But he hasn't said anything in the last 24 hours.
Yeah, but we're waiting to see what he's going to do about Egypt now. And I think that will be a big test of how he sees his country's responsibilities to protect foreign embassies. But the place where the Mubarak and Gaddafi and other dictators' arguments were correct is that they had a terribly effective secret police. They could often find Muslim extremist groups who were prepared to kill Westerners. Before they acted, they put them in prison. They often tortured them. And there was a degree of control of these areas that allowed for some, quote, security that had its benefits, and we're losing some of that. Libya in particular is tragic because I think, as we've all said all morning, that after they won their freedom, not enough has been done to help them develop the institutions and the means. They have the money, they have the oil money, but they need the institutions and the support to develop real security, and they don't have it.
Not to interject another country here, but Syria. That's another concern. If there is a post-Bashar al-Assad Syria, then who's in charge?
Well, exactly. And Syria is, I would say, even more difficult because the ethnic tensions between Sunni, Alawite, and others are very, very strong in Syria. And I think what we're seeing is that the failure to stop this war early, and with each month that passes, that risk of real civil war in Syria, where you have neighborhood by neighborhood, block by block going on for many, many years, may happen. Right now there is a civil war, but you could reach the next level, and that's what we call Beirut, where in Lebanon you had a real civil war for a decade. And I think we're all hoping that doesn't happen in Syria.
We have so much more for you, so much more. Jamie Rubin, if you will, just stay seated here in the studio. But we just have to get a quick break in. We're continuing our breaking news coverage here on Starting Point. Back in just a moment.